This isn't working either.
I didn't touch it, so I don't know what state it is.
I think they turned it off. This is, I guess, this is the remove for projector. No, the projector is on. Okay. Yeah, the projector is on. You connected your Mac?
No, it's just
Oh,
whatever.
you plugged it back.
Oh.
I think someone plugged it back. This is how we found out. Yeah, someone plugged it up.
Sorry, we were having some AV issues here. Okay, we should be good now. This is the Netconf working group. All right, so let's get started. It's time. With me is Lou. He's in place for Kent Watson, who is not here live. Actually, Kent is attending the meeting remotely, so Lou is helping me out. Oh, this is the note well. Anything you say or discuss in this room or in the hallways is covered by the note well at IETF. The blue sheets should have been circulating. Make sure you do sign up. When you are speaking, make sure you're using the microphones. And for people who are trying to scribe, make sure that you state your name slowly, and so for them to be able to make a record of it. So you are on Jabber. Do we need a Jabber scribe? Okay, so Lou's going to help me with Jabber. Thank you. We do have Etherpad. Would really appreciate people adding to the Etherpad and taking whatever minutes we can for the meeting. So the RFC is published since the last meeting. We have a few, mostly the Yang notification, Yang push set of drafts. So congratulations to all the authors for having finished that work. With the status for the list of chartered workgroup items, we still have the what we call the Netconf RESTConf client suite of drafts that Kent and a couple of others are working on. The HTTP client server document did go through workgroup adoption, and we had the HTTP biz, and I had a discussion this afternoon to try to resolve any concerns that they had. So I think we have come to a resolution that they're okay with the work proceeding in Netconf. So the workgroup document, so it is a workgroup document now. And I'll work with the authors to try to address some of the issues that the HTTP biz chairs raised during that meeting. The Yang push notification capabilities is past working group last call. I saw Balaz did update the document in data tracker. So I think we're ready to go ahead with publication of that document. And the remaining two drafts, Yang push notification messages, is still work in progress. I expect that there is a presentation that will be done, hopefully by Heng, if not, then by Eric remotely. And finally, we have, of course, the HTTPS notification, which is a fairly new document. So here's the agenda. We'll start with, of course, the status and issues on client-server suite of drafts before we move to notification messages and notification capabilities presentation. And we'll round up the chartered list of items with my presentation on HTTP-based notification, transport for configured subscription, sorry. In the non-chartered items, we have two new drafts that the authors have published fairly recently, and I hope we'll get a chance to hear from the authors and for anyone who has read those two documents. Any questions before we get started? Good. You're on, Timothy.
Hi, yes. Hey, this is Tim Carey with Nokia. The UDP-based publication channel for streaming telemetry, do we know what the status of that is? It used to be an adopted draft, but I see it fell off.
Yeah, yes. So that document, I don't want to say it got unadopted. I think the authors decided to merge that work with multi-streams originator. And unfortunately, we don't have a presentation of multi-streams originator in this session. So for all practical purposes, I think we are just looking at one document, which is the multi-streams originator document.
Hi, can you hear me?
Apparently, yes.
Okay. Sorry, what did you?
I think someone's asking to talk, but I don't see them. Just ask if someone's trying to say something remotely.
Yeah, did someone try to say something remotely?
Yeah, this is me, Kent. Can you hear me?
Oh, Kent. Okay.
Is it too quiet?
If anything, a little louder.
Okay, I can make it softer.
Yeah, that's better. Okay, you're for some reason not showing up in the queue, but you're talking.
Right, because I just simply hit the microphone button. I wanted to respond to Tim on that last question.
Go ahead.
If the UDP work itself was suspended, let's just say that, the intent is that they would, or someone would republish a draft that would be a UDP-based notif for the subscribe notifications work. Does that make sense? The multi-stream originator draft is really just about how to send notifications from line cards or satellite systems, and it's not itself with respect to UDP in any way.
Okay.
Channeling Tim Carey, he says, yes, thanks, Kent.
Okay, you're up, Kent.
Okay, so I'll press the button, join the queue. Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Morning for me, so. And I just woke up and turned the heat on in the house. As far as the slides go, are you going to project them? I don't see them yet.
They are being projected.
Okay. I, again, don't see them, but I'll just simply say next slide. Okay, great. Again, welcome. Well, I'm not there, but I'm still there. Today, we're going to be presenting the client-server suite of drafts, and you can see that they're now all adopted. The HTTP client-server draft is in gray because while it's adopted, it's not yet posted. So we'll actually, I guess, still be talking about the K. Watson draft that was published before. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, and I can't even see if you have index to the next slide. What I did see is the audience. In case Lorenzo or anyone is listening, if you could somehow pan to the slides for me, that'd be great. So I'm not going to go over this slide in detail, but a lot of work has been done since the last IETF. All the drafts have been updated twice. Next slide, please. This presentation is going to go over 6 different items or topics. And we have 45 minutes for this discussion. I can't imagine it'll take that long. Next slide, please. So first, we'll be talking about key formats. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the crypto types draft, there is, we've been discussing for quite some time how to support algorithms, or I should say the algorithm node, when having public or private keys or even symmetric keys. It's important for the client to be able to know what is the algorithm itself that is. I see the slides now from the video zooming into. That's funny. From the algorithm, what algorithm is being used, and we were actually using the algorithm node before for 2 purposes. The first was exactly what I just said. What was the algorithm being used? But the second was how was it being encoded? And sometimes a particular key value can be encoded in multiple different ways. The simplest explanation for that might be if it's binary versus ASCII. But also there's other kinds of encodings. So for instance, is it a raw key versus a key that's been embedded inside a content message syntax or CMS structure? So we've been discussing how to encode the algorithm field for some time, and the crux of that discussion has been mostly with regards to should it be an identity or an enumeration? Should that be an IETF file or an IANA file? Should it be one file or multiple files? And we're still having some of that discussion. But also part of that was in the description statement for that algorithm value would be how was that value encoded? And while that may be a sufficient and viable strategy, it was thought that we could tease out that aspect of it and somehow simplify the remainder and enable the remainder to be determined more simply. So hence this key format node came to life. The key format node is an identity, and on the left-hand side, you can see there's a base called key format, and then there's 3 immediate descendant identities called public key, private key, and symmetric key. By the way, they all have format after them. Sorry, actually it's public key format and symmetric key format. And then underneath those, there's also additional sub identities. And also they also have dash format at the end of them. I think I was trying to make the slide simpler, and that's why I did that. You can see at the last 2 identities for private key format are controlled by an if feature statement, and as well as the last 2 of the symmetric key format. So here, this if feature format statement is trying to, this is where there's a different encoding, where in one aspect the key could be expressed as a raw value, or alternatively as a structure or a value that's been embedded inside of another structure. The one symmetric key itself is a CMS structure, but and more technically, I think it's a assigned data CMS structure. And even more particularly, the assigned data has within it a variable that describes what is the embedded structure, and so it's a specific kind of embedded structure inside that assigned data structure. Both these other two formats are defined by other RFCs. Okay, next slide, please. And then, so there's the identity hierarchy. So that's one aspect. And I should say that that is inside the cryptotypes or IETF cryptotypes.yang module. And also inside that same module are 3 groupings. The 2 on the left are for asymmetric keys, and the 1 on the right is for symmetric keys. And these groupings have been around for some time, but the part that's in red is the important part. You can see in the top left, the public key grouping. It now contains, well, first it contains the leaf algorithm. So that leaf algorithm has been there for some time. And the part that's in bright green is sort of what we'll be discussing on the next topic. But how do we describe algorithms, and are they identities or enumerations, etc. But it's that value. But then the second leaf is the new one. So this is a leaf that is containing an identity ref to a public key format. So there's that. And then you can see the other grouping, the asymmetric key pair grouping. That grouping uses the public key grouping because every private key also has a public key. But it distinctly identifies its own private key format. And yes, both the public and private key values could be expressed differently. Most commonly, they would be done similarly, right? But it is possible, and actually, in some cases, necessary, I suppose, if you want to encrypt your private key, but the public key is still a raw value. So it's still possible. I mean, it's necessary that they could deviate or differ in their encoding strategies. So that's how asymmetric keys, the groupings for asymmetric keys have been modified. And then on the right-hand side, it's almost the same strategy, but there's only the symmetric key value. So here, the leaf is called key format, as opposed to public key format and private key format. So that's the gist of this strategy. And before I ask the question, if there's any thoughts or concerns, let's see, what do I want to say? No, I guess that is it. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. What I wanted to say was, and I don't have a slide, it's not on the slides, but after having done this, most of the prior use of the algorithm leaf has been replaced with this new key format leaf. If you were to look at the entirety of the remainder of the Yang modules, you'll see that the only remaining use of the algorithm leaf, at least from the client's perspective of being able to, the primary use, is in the actions, generate private key and generate symmetric key. So you can clearly tell that when a client is trying to generate a key, it would need to be able to use the algorithm to say what kind of key to generate. So that is one of the most crucial remaining uses of the legacy algorithm value, and then of course it's also still there for more of a read-only view. I mean, it is still writable, but you couldn't write it just arbitrarily. But it's definitely the case that if another client were to connect and wanted to look at the key, just having the key format by itself is not enough. They would actually need that read-only value of what is the algorithm in order to have full appreciation. But so anyway, what I'm trying to say is this key format is taking over the most of the prior use of the algorithm leaf. Okay. So with that, are there any thoughts or concerns with this approach?
None locally.
Okay. And I don't think I see anything on MeetEcho either, so great. All right, so so I think it's working out well. I'll just say that Balaj K from Ericsson has been tracking this, and at first he had some mild concerns, but then I replied on list about how the advantages of it, and I think I won him over. But nonetheless, we'll continue this discussion on the list. Next slide, please. And so we'll be talking about algorithms. Next slide after that. All right, as I was just saying, the algorithm leaf is still there, and its use is not as much as it was before, but nonetheless, it's still there, and we still need to resolve the issue that we've been trying to resolve for a long time. Previously, there were type defs inside IETF crypto types module, and now those type defs have been moved into external IANA, or I should say external modules, 3 of them. And there's two aspects to that statement. The first is that each kind of module, or each type of algorithm has been moved into its own module. So there's one module that's specific for symmetric algorithms, another one that's for asymmetric algorithms, and another one for hashing algorithms. Also, I should mention we've reduced the total number of algorithm types. I think before there may have been 8 or 9 different kinds of algorithm types, but we reduced them down to just these 3. These 3 being the ones that are necessary for defining the Netconf and RESTconf server modules, and the remainder really not necessary for our work, but in the fullness of time, important to other working groups, I'm sure, but not something that we need to take on ourselves. So that's why just these 3 types of algorithms are being focused on. So that's the first aspect, that we've broken up into 3. The other is that we also moved them from being IETF prefix to IANA prefix. And actually I have a separate slide that talks on that specific point. So first, on that, you can see in the lower left, each module has a type def. So we actually just moved the type def from the cryptotypes module to the other module. And here's an example of that type def. You can see that this type def is defining an enumeration, so it's not an identity. We may want to have a discussion if it should be an enumeration or identity. I actually think the enumerations are probably simpler to work with, but it could even be as simple as just a string. Here only the symmetric algorithm types are being shown, but of course asymmetric and hashing algorithms follow the identical strategy of being a type def containing enumerations. So before I move on to the next slide, any comments about this, what I've discussed so far?
Nobody locally.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I said I was going to go back and talk about the IANA part of it. The intent behind the IANA prefix was that we'd be able to somehow transfer the maintenance of these 3 modules and to IANA. That if other working groups were to publish new algorithms, whether it be a symmetric algorithm or an asymmetric algorithm, that their publication process would somehow trigger an event that IANA would pick up and automatically update one of these modules and publish it. And this strategy has been taken with other modules. And I did look at a couple other IANA modules, and one thing I noted about them was that it seemed that there's a one-to-one mapping between those modules and a particular registry, or actually to a particular RFC. Whether it's not as a particular registry, I think is still, I'm not sure about that, but in scanning these type defs in these 3 modules, I noticed there was a multiplicity of RFCs that were being defined. And so this, it wasn't clear to me how would IANA know when an algorithm from, for instance, a new RFC, one that didn't exist before, was supposed to be added into this particular, would cause this particular Yang module to be needing to be augmented. And so I think that was, so really I should probably pause here and ask if there's questions. That was, but I don't have the little thing that says that. Yes, I see someone at the microphone.
Raja Hutka. There is actually an ongoing discussion regarding my draft in the NSOP working group. I don't know if that actually it now appeared in the main IETF mailing list. So I guess this is more a NetMod thing to consider. But you ask how would IANA know when an algorithm should be added? So my question to this question would be, how would IANA know that an algorithm should be added to the registry itself? Because as soon as this is decided, then it should be clear, or at least I hope, to IANA that the Yang module should be updated basically at the same time. So I really don't see a big problem with this. The only problem is that maybe careless readers of that RFC could take the module contained there as the most recent revision of the registry, which needn't be the case, because then the module lives under the IANA care and may have new revisions, but I don't know how to solve this easily, because we don't have any like formal language for writing the module templates as you suggest here. So this is really quite a difficult proposition, I think.
Yeah. So thanks, Leva. That makes a perfect sense to me, that there would be a registry that and multiple RFCs could be feeding into that one registry. And then when that registry gets updated, it would cause a cascading effect to updating the module. That makes sense in theory. But I think for us in particular, there may be that may be challenging. And the reason why is because we're working with different protocols, in particular SSH and TLS. And I fully imagine there being registries that are around the algorithms used for SSH, and there's registries being used for algorithms that are used around TLS. But we're looking for something that's more universal, and I don't know if that particular registry exists. That could become our challenge. Yes?
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I definitely think this is something that should be handled by something like an IANA registry. I think that's where these need to get to. I think that that having to update an RFC to add these new protocols in would be a mistake. I thought with the IANA registries, there was ones where you could have like experts that were assigned to add values in. So it may be that you could assign the Yang doctors or NetMod or something to update that registry if that was an easy way to do. So maybe there's other ways to solve this problem that involves different human input into updating the registry. But I think we want to somehow get to a solution where it is in IANA, is my impression.
Okay. And just as you were saying that, Rob, thank you. It occurred to me that what I was just saying about how there's being SSH and TLS specific registries, we could make updates. The IANA request could be, if those registries are being updated, then please allow there to be a trickle-down update to this other registry, which is an indirect. It may not be one-to-one, but with a human expert, they could do that particular translation and make it happen. That's a good idea.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. And so, sort of rounding out the discussion about algorithms is it's necessary. So there's one thing, which is defining the dictionary of all algorithms. It's necessary to have a dictionary of the algorithms for interoperability. And it could be that each vendor came up with their own, the strings, but that wouldn't help with interoperability. So having a universal dictionary is important. But there's another aspect, which is which subset of that universal dictionary does a particular server support? And this discussion has been on the list also recently. So for those who have been following that, some of this will be a repeat, but nonetheless, I'll go over it. So first, each module currently is, I should say each of those three IANA modules that we just discussed is currently defining a config false list of algorithms that are supported by that server. And so an example of that, you can see they all kind of follow the pattern of supported dash and what kind of algorithm it is dash algorithms. It is config false, it's a list, and then just a list of leafs with references to that type def, or I shouldn't say reference, but using that type def that we discussed in the previous slide. So that's again what we currently have. Two questions related to that. The first is, instead of having a global list, should we be having instead SSH and TLS specific lists? And to sort of back into that discussion, it was Martin's comment a couple of days ago, or I guess it was late last week, where it was saying that a particular application or server may use different or be able to use different algorithms in different locations. And if you think about how that application has been constructed with libraries, one part of the application may use one library and it's able to support certain algorithms. Another part of the application uses a different library and hence other algorithms. So there's that aspect. I think the intent behind a global list would be when you're thinking, like for instance, FIPS mode, where you're taking, there's the set of algorithms and then, you turn on FIPS mode. So now it's a subset of algorithms. And both those statements are sort of, there's a global list. But this is a more refined concern where we're saying that it's actually related to the particular libraries that are being used. And hence it's actually a variable or the list varies or potentially could vary based on where in the modeling tree it's being used. So there's sort of, the most granular way of doing that would be every single location where the algorithm leaf is being used. There could be a list there, or maybe an action statement that could return a list. But that's highly granular and maybe ideal, but from a theoretical perspective, but not very practical from a modeling perspective. It seems like a possible sweet spot would be to focus on the algorithms, and so have one list instead of having the single global list, instead of having or splitting it essentially into two global lists, one of those lists being specific to SSH and the other to TLS. And to be clear, because we're talking about three different algorithm types, there'd be 3 for SSH and 3 for TLS, a total of 6 of these global lists. That's the current idea. Any thoughts about that? I know that when Martin and I were discussing, he replied better. So have his response.
Hi, this is Henk. Hi, Kent.
Hi, Henk.
I somehow find myself in the slide. I think it's very important to do this. The options you were highlighting, I'm not an expert in this, so probably this group is, and I think one will be selected or a set of them. I think this somehow swaps over to TrustStore because all these algorithms and the big asymmetric or symmetric or for hashing, they will have in the end the key material used for these algorithms. And I think nevertheless that is TrustStore side, there are hints and methods to find and identify these keys. And I think this belongs also here because these have to be defined like in the same way, I assume. With the algorithm, there comes an identification for the payload for the algorithm. And probably that is not a part of the key store because that is too late. If you go to the store, you already assume you how to find it. So there has to be a link between the key identification or key hint or identification hint. There are multiple names for this. And here on this side of the crypto type things. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just wanted to give this as a comment.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure. It seems like maybe you had a second comment, but to respond to the first one, I think what you're discussing right now is more what I was saying about the need for having the global dictionary. What are all the algorithms? What are all the type defs for interoperability? Here, what we're talking about is trying to identify the subset of those algorithms that a particular server supports, and so I think it's actually that's a different discussion. And to that first one, what is the global dictionary of algorithms? If you actually look a little bit deeper, right here we're talking about the cryptotypes draft, so there's the universal set of algorithms at that level. But then if you were to look into the SSH and TLS specific drafts, you'll see that they have mapping tables. And in particular, I mean the SSH and TLS protocols, they have very specific algorithms, enumerations of values, strings that are sent over the wire. And so there's these mapping tables that, for those who are familiar with SSH specific algorithms or TLS specific algorithms, be mindful that while the algorithm is normally called foo in TLS, it's actually, bar here in the cryptotypes draft. So there's that mapping. Okay.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I think this is part of a generalized problem of basically server capabilities, and more I think that we actually, as a working group or maybe in NetMod, need to look at that more about giving a device's capabilities and putting an instance data file format and having that available off the box. And that's part of the work that Balazs has been doing. But I don't think we've defined all the capabilities, but I see this as a subset of those. However, that work will take a long time. So I think what we're looking for here is a sort of stopgap measure to solve in the short term. And I think that either of what you propose there would work, either a global list or I think your suggestion of having 6 lists, that seems reasonable to me at the global level. I wouldn't go anything more complicated than that, though. I'd keep it. I think what you're proposing there makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Looks like the microphone line is empty, so I'll move on to the second question here, number 2. How are these lists to be used? You cannot use a leaf ref, right? I mean, they're config false lists, and well, okay, not only are they config false lists, but they're also polymorphic in the sense that when you have the reference to the what am I trying to say? Okay, so actually, what I'm thinking is that you would have, okay, forget that part. Forget the polymorphic part. But definitely, it's a config false list, and you can't have a leaf ref to a config false list. So again, what would be the intention for how these lists are being used? We could have in the algorithm description statement, which would be in cryptotypes, something like what's in yellow at the bottom of the screen. It is recommended that each protocol, SSH, TLS, etc., makes available a list of the subset of algorithms supported. Okay, maybe that's a different statement. So there's, sorry, that wasn't a clean segue. There's 2 comments being made here, but yeah. So there's we need a set of strategies. So whenever an algorithm or protocol is trying to define, mappings, that we say you should create these other lists. But once the list exists, how are they being used? I guess it's just simply the client referring to the list, opportunistically, optionally, I should even add, to try to determine what it is the server supports before they try to configure the server. And worst case, if they send a bad value to the server, it will fail, RPC error, the request. So maybe there's no need to have a leaf ref or anything like this.
So before Robert gets on the mic, we have a question on Jabber from Martin asking, do we need a similar list for key format supported and supported key format. Sorry.
Okay, so to answer Martin's question, well, there is, because, and we didn't actually, is it possible to go back to slide number 5, just quickly? So on slide 5, you can, in particular, you can see here those if feature statements, the one symmetric key and the asymmetric, and the one asymmetric key. Those are CMS structures, which are more complex, or let's say less commonly used than the raw key values. If you were to use OpenSSL and ask it to generate a key, or even OpenSSH and ask it to generate a key, neither of those tools are going to generate you a one symmetric key or one asymmetric key structure by default. But it's necessary to have, well, first off, in some cases, it's preferred to use those structures because they do two things. They actually internally embed the algorithm identifier, which is somewhat redundant, and maybe we should gloss over that fact, because a lot of structures embed values that are also redundantly expressed outside the structure. But more importantly, it's necessary to use, they also support attributes. So for instance, a private key can be tagged with attributes that it's only to be used for signing, or it's only to be used for encryption, or these kinds of things that what in TLS certificates might be referred to as key usage. So that one asymmetric key structure has the ability to capture the key usage, where the raw value has no way of doing that. So in some applications, it may be important to use the CMS structure over the raw value just to have that ability. But then lastly, it's actually necessary to use these structures, the one asymmetric key and one symmetric key structures, if you wish to encrypt the keys. There's just no other way or no standard way, I should say, to encrypt or express keys that have been encrypted other than by using these structures. So in all of that response, what I'm trying to say is I view the use of these structures as sort of advanced. The simple get it to market as quickly as possible application is unlikely to want to support these advanced structures. Hence the desire to put them under feature statements. And more specifically answering your question, you asked about should we have config false lists. I don't think we need to have config false lists like the ones that we're talking about here, because we have the feature statements. And you connect to the server, you go to the Yang library, you ask the Yang library what features do you support. That is in a way a config false list of those features that are being supported. So the only thing that's not really being captured is it granular enough? Yeah, features are global, whereas do we need to have the statement specific for SSH versus TLS? And maybe that was your question.
So I think Martin has a follow-up question. Suppose I support SSH public key, but not subject public key info for my SSH keys.
Sorry, I can't, I don't have the Jabber up. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Suppose I support SSH public key, but not subject public key info for my SSH keys.
I see. Okay, right. Actually, I think Martin and I had this very conversation on the list. And in the reply to that question, I was thinking that there could be must statements, whereby in the SSH, I guess this would be the IETF SSH server and IETF SSH client modules, where they are using the asymmetric and symmetric key structures that was on the screen a few slides back. When they're using those groupings, they would refine them with a must expression that would say that the SSH key must be an SSH public key, and not it cannot be a subject public key. Whereas in the TLS module, it would be saying that its must statement would be saying that it must be a subject public key and not an SSH public key. So I think we could enable those downstream modules that are using those groupings to inject that discrimination. Does that make sense?
This is Hank at the mic. I just had a question. I don't have a question anymore. Yes, I think that makes sense.
Okay, great. All right, so can we jump back to slide 10? Oh, or unless there's another comment about that question from Martin.
Just a quick note from Martin saying, fine with me, less flexibility, but I think that is okay.
Then back to slide 10, please, while Rob is asking his question.
Yes, so Rob Wilson, Cisco. So going back to the question on the second question, I think it's almost the same answer as before, that actually I think we solve this as part of a wider capabilities work, I think. And so I think what your suggestion of just saying you update the description statements, I think that's fine. I think that's sufficient for this. I wouldn't try and do anything more sophisticated here. I'd keep it simple now and say this can be solved in future, hopefully, if there's interest.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, next slide then. We'll be talking, next the discussion is about raw public keys and pre-shared keys. Next slide. Okay, so what's currently published in CryptoTypes 12 and TrustStore 7 is actually no longer current in the sense that the submission window closed, but after it closed, there were ongoing discussions on lists that kind of moved the ball down the road a little bit. So for those that reviewed the drafts that are currently published, this and weren't on the list, this may be new, but in early review of those particular modules, 12 and 7, identified no need to define new types, that the existing types and groupings could be used. So, and remember what we're talking about is for a number of years, we've had already the notion of symmetric keys and asymmetric keys. And what we're talking about here in TLS, normally it uses X59 certificates, but it's also possible to use raw public keys and symmetric keys. But what is a raw public key? Well, it's basically an asymmetric key. What is a pre-shared key? Well, it's basically a symmetric key. So that was the observation that was made by the other participant, Balaj K. And so the thinking was, rather than defining new types and groupings specific for raw public keys and pre-shared keys, such as those that you'll find inside CryptoTypes 12 and TrustStore 7, instead, can we not repurpose the existing groupings that we have? That makes a lot of sense to me. And so the proposal that was on list and on screen is essentially to, in TrustStore, I think in the current published document, you'll find there's a list of the raw public keys that have been that are trusted, and then also there was a list of the pre-shared keys that were trusted, and so that the list of pre-shared keys have been removed. Actually, not specifically because it's an overlap, but because it's unnecessary. If you are having a pre-shared key, I mean, it's a shared key, so you're that same symmetric key value is being used both sort of as your private key and also as the public key, but it's not saying private and public doesn't make sense because it's symmetric. It's the same key value, and it's a secret value, and you would want that secret to be stored in key store, not in TrustStore. So the observation being is that value would be stored in the key store, and we wouldn't want it to be also stored in the TrustStore, the exact same value. So simply we removed pre-shared keys or PSKs from TrustStore, but kind of that itself is not really following the statement that I was just making above. Here you see there are certificates and separately also raw public keys. We could have a discussion if we want to. I mean, these are different things, right? So a certificate is a public key that's been signed by an issuer, and so that's a particular thing. A raw public key is, well, it's it's not having any of that extra attribution associated with it. So that's definitely, it seems to be a separate thing and necessary to store distinctly in the trust store, and hence why it's still there. But on the right-hand side, sorry, before I go to the right-hand side, going down to the bottom in the key store, there was also in the key store, well, actually, there wasn't. When Hank had worked with me to update the trust store, we did not actually update also the key store, but there was some discussion about should we also be updating the key store, and so we thought it would be necessary. And the first thought was, well, previously we had asymmetric keys and symmetric keys, and so the first naive thought was let's add also to that list raw public keys and PSKs, so it'd be a total of 4 things or 4 descendants underneath the key store. But then upon the observation that really raw public keys are asymmetric keys and PSKs are symmetric keys, we collapsed them, and now they are as sort of the proposals as they are on the screen. I think I'll pause right there. I see Hank at the mic.
Yeah. Again, this is Hank. So I think there is a distinguishing feature that we are collapsing, but is not applying to both sides of the coin, which is what I tried to come to before, the key IDs. So pre-shared keys have a preferred and even sometimes very strong recommended way to identify the pre-shared keys, because there can be multiple of them, and that is different to other symmetric keys. So I agree with the notion that apparently pairwise symmetric keys or pre-shared keys, whatever you want to call them, are symmetric, because in the new interpretation of the acronym, it literally says pairwise shared symmetric keys, sorry. And so that's true, but the pre-shared key identification, and typically you go with an ID into the system, you don't have the hash always or something more concrete, but the ID, and there is recommended identity hints for PSKs, for TLS, and I think these do not apply to all symmetric keys. So how do you deal with these different kind of IDs if you collapse the concept in symmetric simply as that?
So Hank, can you help me understand that just for a second? These IDs, are these IDs communicated on the wire? Or
Yes.
Are they just they are. Okay. Okay. So then I was going to say that what's not being shown on the screen is that each of these lists, they're lists, and so there's a key value, and it's called name, and it's an arbitrary user specified name. That's how you could distinguish one key from the other. But you're actually referring to a value that needs to be communicated on the wire. Okay, so that's a reason for needing to actually, have a distinct thing there for those values. Can we take that up on the list?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, so we'll needing to be we'll take that up on the list and add or I guess the idea is that we'd be adding those values to the key store, or we'd have distinct lists for capturing those also in the key store. Okay, now on the right-hand side of this slide, we see host keys and raw public keys, and there's a question of should these two things be merged, possibly. I mean, a host key is effectively an asymmetric key value, and a raw public key is an asymmetric key value. And so, I mean, there's the encoding. I mean, I understand that, when we think about SSH host keys, we think about that textualized format that, so it's a kind of an encoding. But remember, separately, we have the key format. There's the algorithm, and there's a key format that we discussed previously. So it seems that maybe trust store, we could really just have one, and these two things could be merged, and then, for those that are used for SSH, the key format would say it's an SSH key, and for those that are being used for other, it'd be the other kind of encoding that'd be specific for that. The key format would be different. So that's my question to the working group. Any comments or thoughts? Okay, I think that particular one probably requires a little modeling, examples where we play it out and see how it would go. It seems possible. It seems viable, and if there's an opportunity to simplify things, we should. So that'll be something to explore as we move forward with this. Okay, next slide, please. This will be slide 13. Okay, so what would the impact of having raw public keys and pairwise symmetric or pre-shared keys be onto the TLS model? And mind you, we're talking about the TLS model and not the SSH model, because the notion of using these values are really specific with TLS. SSH, with SSH, they do have different kinds of keys. They talk about, they have public key, and then within public key, they also have, for instance, certificate-based public keys and PGP-based public keys. So yes, SSH does have variations in its public keys, but but they don't really refer to raw public keys or PS keys. Those concepts are really specific to TLS, and hence why this slide is only talking about the impact to TLS. And so what is the impact? So there is this TLS client grouping, and a similar impact would be to the TLS server grouping. And in this grouping, we have, for instance, client identity. And of course, if the client is going to identify itself using, it's called pub key or pre-shared key, but if it's pub key, it's actually having a private key. So if it's identifying itself using its public key, then of course the server needs to be able to authenticate it using a public key. And so the impact is going to be, having two impacts. One, where the client is trying to identify itself, or the server is trying to identify itself, and then secondly, where the client is trying to authenticate servers, or the servers are trying to authenticate clients. So that's why we have the impact is in two locations, and in both locations, the impact is kind of similar in the sense that there's a choice, I guess the choice part is only in the identity, but nonetheless, that we enable. There's a variation, right? You can, for clients, it's a choice because you can. I wanted about to say you can only identify yourself using one strategy. I'm not sure if that's totally true, but I think it is true. So you kind of pick one. You want to identify yourself using a PSK, so you would pick that choice and do it that way. But when you're authenticating, that actually becomes more of a multiplicity. You have really, and this is like references to Trustor, for instance. Yes, so there's many kinds of certificates and many kinds of keys, raw public keys that could be used for authentication purposes. And so that's more, it doesn't need to be a choice. It's more of a union because you have a multiplicity of clients that are coming in, and one client may be using one strategy versus another strategy. So it's not a choice there. Okay, well, anyway, that is the current impact. And I don't have a question per se. I just wanted to bring it to the working group's attention. Next, or actually, if there is a comment, I don't think I see anyone standing at the microphone. So next slide, please.
So Kent, before we move on, you have 10 more minutes.
Okay, and there's only 4 more slides, or really 2 more content slides after this one. So I think we'll be okay, thank you. Okay, so we spoke about the impact to the TLS model. There's also impact to the Netconf and RESTconf models. So we spoke, so if the clients can identify themselves using RPK or PSK, we also talked about the servers needing to be able to authenticate the clients. But in addition, the servers need to be able to extract a username. What is the Netconf username? What is the RESTconf username for that client that only identified itself using a raw public key or a pre-shared key, and in particular, not a certificate. If they were using a certificate, then we'd leverage the existing cert to name mapping structure where it describes how to extract a username from a certificate. So it seems like we would need something like that, how to map or extract a username from a PSK or a robot key. So a couple options maybe would be one, to define PSK to name and RPK to name maps now, and why do it now? I mean, is it like to the extent that they're needed now? Or two, just leave those definitions for some future update and not worry about it now. And I think that's probably a good place to pause. Any comments?
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So, I mean, I don't know how important this is. If there's a choice and it makes sense, you can defer this. I would suggest it's better to try and defer this and get the drafts finished. So that's my preference. But if this is required for this to work, then we need to do it now. But I don't know. It's hard to.
Within our working group, or with the Netconf and RESTconf protocols, I've never heard anyone ask for this support. The desire for wanting to add support for PSK and RPK, I mean, theoretically it's possible, and it probably should be supported in the fullness of time. But the immediate use would be more, and Hank was the one that was asking for this. It's more for CoAP and CoAP's use of DTLS, which is a variant of TLS, and so and I think they very much want to be using RPK and PSK immediately. So having defined support for RPK and PSK in cryptotypes, in key store, in trust store, is very important to CoAP. But for us, Netconf, RESTconf, again, I don't think is necessary. So I'm very happy and willing to defer the definition of these mappings until later.
My preference then is to defer and let Hank write a draft on this.
Okay. So I think that I'll assume that we'll defer.
I just want to say TLS is also simply using them, not just as often, but it's most certainly it is a TLS spec. So if we want to be TLS compliant, well.
Yeah, that's right. So you're right. Theoretically, is there, someone could want to use them, and if they wanted to use them, if we don't do these mappings, they just simply can't, unless they create their own mappings. But I think that's okay. I think the working group, we could decide to just not worry about that until the problem arises completely. So we're aware that there will be a hole in the solution, and we, with our eyes open, say it's okay.
Kent,
yes?
This is from Martin.
Yep.
Two questions, or sort of linked. With two, doesn't that mean that we have an incomplete solution? And part B is, can we leave out RPK / PSK for NC / RC?
Yes, exactly. So first, yes, it would be an incomplete solution, as we were just saying. And then secondly, exactly, we just simply not, can we leave them out? I mean, I think what you're asking is, can we somehow make it be that clients cannot use them? I can't respond to that just right now. I mean, like, can there be a must expression or something like that that could be used to restrict the syntax so that's not possible? I need to look at that just a little bit more. Okay, so I think that's it for here. Can we jump ahead? Really just go 2 slides forward, please. For client authentication, there's actually the remainder of this discussion about client authentication. First, we're going to talk about local versus external. And in the currently published versions of the SSH TLS modules, there's a local or external flag to indicate if the client authentication should be defined inside or outside the data model. Specifically, where's the list of clients defined? And sort of my observation. I mean, do you want to define your list of clients inside the part of the data model that's kind of primarily oriented to the transport, defining the endpoint to the transport? Would you want to define your clients there, your list of clients there, or would you want to have some other place that you're defining your clients? And so that was the notion of the local versus external. Martin raised this discussion on list since the publication of or the submission of these drafts, and we felt that we could just simply remove this choice, or I should say we could remove the choice by really removing the external case and flattening the local case. So the only case that remains would be the local case, but adding a feature statement to the local case so that it would only be, for those servers that wanted to define clients locally, they could by enabling that feature statement. And otherwise, they'd be on their own to define where the client authentication is being configured themselves separately. So that's the current strategy. If there's no objections, any comments? Yeah. In the interest of time, I think we'll just move forward. 2 slides, please. Again, still talking about client authentication, but now required versus optional. In the currently published versions of the TLS and HTTP drafts, so this is not with SSH, but TLS and HTTP, there's a required versus optional flag to indicate if client authentication must succeed at that protocol layer or not. And this is necessary because in RESTconf, there's RESTconf's authentication model says that the client may be authenticated at the TLS layer or at the HTTP layer, or both. And so there's this, I was trying to express that, like, how do we express if it's being authenticated at one layer versus the other layer? However, recent on-list discussion has led to the following, which is essentially the removal of this choice completely, because primarily code that I've been working on isn't using the flag. Rather, it's keying off of what credentials have been configured. So, in the client list that we spoke about 2 slides prior, we in each client definition, the client may have a password configured, and separately it may have a TLS trust anchor configured. If it has a password configured, then my code says, well, you must authenticate using HTTP basic auth. If you have a TLS trust anchor configured, then you must authenticate at the TLS level as well. So it's being driven more by what has been configured at that client level instead of using a flag here. So a couple examples: if a trust anchor has been configured, then the TLS. Oh, well, okay, that's what I just said. So. Any thoughts or concerns about that? Makes sense, right? To just go off of what's been configured. Well, I know Martin's nodding his head because he agreed on list when we had that discussion. So if there's no objections, then the next update will remove it, just as been discussed there. And so that is, I'm sorry, I said there is one more, 2 more slides, please. This is the last slide. There's a certificate to name fingerprint mapping. Currently, both in the IETF, Netconf, and RESTconf server models, there's a cert to name grouping that maps the client certificates to the username. The grouping currently is containing mandatory true for a node called fingerprint. And so the observation here is that in what I think could be a common case deployment scenario would be unnecessary to have to define that fingerprint all the time. That a deployment would have sort of a deployment-wide strategy. They have an issuer, and the issuer is signing all of their certificates the same way, and the username is put in the same field for all the certificates, and so the strategy for how to extract a username from a certificate is universal. and hence the need to identify the fingerprint of the certificate, and in order to figure out the extraction strategy is be unnecessary or redundant effectively. And so, the thinking is, well, let's remove this mandatory true because it's not required always. And so in the current model, when using the grouping, it refines the mandatory true to a mandatory false. And so two aspects of that. First off, it does not impact existing behavior. So for those who like to use certificate mappings and they want to always specify fingerprints, they still can. It's just giving them the option to not specify it if they don't need to or want to, or I should say have to. And the second aspect is really what Martin was saying, is that doing this would need to be used with care, but isn't that the case with all things in security? The certificate of name mapping, it's a list. It's a user ordered list. From a Yang modeling, Yang syntax perspective, it's not actually I should say ordered by user. Instead, it has a field called ID, and the clients are supposed to, and the servers are supposed to numerically sort. So the lowest ID is actually the first in the list, and so they are sorted though. They're user sorted lists, and it would be important for clients to ensure that if there is more than one value in this list, that the one that's not having the fingerprint is at the very end of the list, because it's effectively the catch-all, the global wild card. It matches all, so it becomes the default. It just need to make sure that that particular entry is at the end of the list, so that yes, there's some care with respect to that. Beyond that, not really. So, any thoughts or concerns?
Yeah, let's make it quick because we are already over time on this.
So Robert says, on this particular thing, I've got no issue with concerns. I do have one other question on one of the other drafts. Can I raise that now, or is it too late?
Could you do it on the list?
Yeah, can do.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So, Hank, will you be presenting? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I have to do a few things. One of them is this.
Yeah, it's 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm not Eric. I'm Hank. I'm presenting for the message bundles for notifications here today. Next slide, please.
Oh, you have to.
Oh, all this. Thank you, Hank. Okay. We have old school Yang notification. Probably everybody knows about them. We now have the 3 RFCs that are Yang push. and though we're very big space of new types of notification that can be emitted. Some of them are originating from changes to data stores. Some of them are originating from actual notification statements and Yang module definitions. All of these can produce quite a lot of Yang telemetry. There will be flows of notifications, and these flows might be aggregated at some point. And even on the emitter that is the Yang data store, there might be quite a lot of original sources of notification statements, instances in this case. And these could be already bundled at the source. Later on in the stream, they could be bundled by Yang agents intermediately. So there is then a specific need for metadata, how to do this, which modules are involved, what is this about. These are, of course, all informations that are inside the tons, so to speak, notification instances in the bundle. But if you just want to have fast processing of these, let's call it telemetry content, it's rather useful to have some explicit metadata at the top of the notification bundle. So effectively, it's the known notifications, but with a header that's probably the bundle header with metadata in it. And then this. So there are some explicit changes in the last iteration of this draft. Especially we removed, I think it's in here, the potential, the capability of transporting something that is not a Yang notification. Everybody was a little bit like, this is Netconf, why are you doing, I don't know, an RTP notification message here? This is not the right place for that. Acceptable and true, I think. It could be augmented in again if you want this on a custom basis. And everything in the draft at the moment is purely notification based now. There's an interesting question that's come up on the list. How do I know that my receiver is capable of doing that? So this basically goes back to a notif drafts. That would be a place where it is easy to highlight where capabilities lie. I think the group has to find use of it in the first place. I think it has, a bit because it has survived until version 8 of the draft now. But I don't know, because I'm not a Yang expert, not a Netconf expert, if the notif draft, especially HTTPS notif that is upcoming, is the right place to solve the can my receiver actually process the bundle header statements. I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe the room does?
Yep. So as a contributor, so there is interest in discovering receiver support.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but the transport might decide what might be used. Like in our case, we use options to discover receiver support.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then is the format. How would the receiver capabilities be documented so that when read, you know all the capabilities that the receiver has?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something surely the draft can take up if they want to.
We can come up with capability options and how to maybe fine-grain them, maybe not even, I don't know, but we can work on this for a first draft and then give it to the group, and you can find out if this makes sense, I guess. Again, I'm not the deep expert on this term, so I thank you for that comment. Andy was posting to, I think it was Andy, I don't know, some of our own contributor was posting to the list. Yeah, well, if you're talking about Yang telemetry, isn't it more useful if you focus on the binary representation, therefore have all the values not in text, but as a binary representation? What is this referring to is the core conf work in the constrained environment space here. I don't have an answer to this. I'm more like an IoT guy. So I would be very happy not to waste space in big volumes of telemetry with human readable text and XML. I might not be, this might be just my point of view, but I think it is at least worth considering, and we could highlight, I think the question is on the list, but we could highlight it again and make it more prominent when we call for a consensus or something, how people think about this. And our default option is binary, I think. And this has to be bashed. Yeah, but
Rob Wilson, Cisco, I think binary encoding is key for telemetry. I think for the boxes, even non-IoT devices, routers and things that are generating a lot of data want a binary encoding, and that without having support for that, I think it acts against the IETF telemetry solution.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. So thank you.
It looks like Kent is in queue. I'm not sure whether he really means to be.
I don't see that. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, I don't mean to be.
Okay, we'll drop you. Thanks.
Go away. And that's basically it. So last question on this slide is important. Is there some significant interest in doing this? Again, the context is there is a large volume of notification now that can be created, and you have to manage that somehow. Which is not highlighted on the screen is there are cool, so to speak, footer items that are highlighting, for example, integrity evidence, which is developed over in the remote attestation working group. all of these blobs can be signed, and the signature is not the original creator of the notification. So there is some optional, but very useful management and telemetry stream information in here. So having added that, is there some strong objection to continue this work in this room? That does not seem to be the case. I'm very happy about that, and I can give time to other people. Okay. Oh, sorry. WG closure. Huh?
Yeah, so just a quick comment on it. I think we still have the whole question of receiver support.
Oh, the receiver support. But this is the basically the transition stone, and then.
So let's try to address that before we talk
Cool.
about.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, Arsenja from Ericsson. Hopefully, getting near to finalizing the Yang push notification capabilities draft. So just the basic concept, the Yang push capabilities has a number of capabilities, and it would be good to know what these capabilities are before trying to get the notifications. The most important original was whether on-change can be supported for individual data nodes or not. But then since then, a number of other capabilities were added to the data model. So, okay. Here we see some of the capabilities. Yeah. And one key concept that's coming in more and more, the capabilities are described on multiple levels. They can be general for the publisher, and we are starting to use the publisher because it publishes notifications. Or it can be specific for individual data stores. For example, support notifications only from running, but not from candidate or startup. Or in some cases, we want to be able to specify capabilities on individual data nodes. So I can support notifications for interfaces generally, but not for interface statistics. Or maybe I want to be able to support notifications for gigabit interfaces because they are new hardware, but not for old ones. So if needed, then you can specify the capabilities per data node and for example, interface instance. Always, if you have a more specific capability definition, so you might have a capability definition saying that on-change notifications are supported for the whole node, but then you have more specific definition that interface statistics on-change support is not provided. The more specific always overrides the less specific. Okay, so there have been a number of updates since the last IETF. We added these two capabilities, excluded change type. So for on-change notifications, we can say that I only want notifications about a create or a modify or a delete operations, and I can say that I only want some of these. And this is already supported by Yang push, but now we have a capability to say, does the system support excluding some change types? The error message is already in Yang push, but it's not defined there what is supported, or how should we notify what is supported. Also, it came up lately that in some cases only on-change notifications might be supported, and periodic might not. If you think about it, yep. For example, do we support periodic notifications about startup configuration? Probably we don't now want to do that either. So periodic notifications can be supported or not, and that's indicated. I restructured the Yang module, so it uses the node selector in the same way as NACM access control uses, which is basically that the simple slash means the whole data store, So we don't need a special modeling level for the whole data store. It's just indicated by the simple slash. Also move to the using the term publisher, because it's not really a server anymore. Let's say in case of HTTP-based notifications. In some cases, the term server is still there, because when we speak about which data stores are supported, then yes, that's a Netconf or RESTconf server functionality. As requested by some, there's an explicit indication that this works both for NMDA and non-NMDA systems. Really, the only little difference is that if we are speaking non-NMDA, then this draft considers the state data to be part of the running configuration, just for the purpose of this draft. So it's not a general statement in any way. And also I updated the draft to follow the instance file format draft. We had work group last call, and I have published updates since then. Sorry for it. The updates were published yesterday and maybe even after midnight today. One upcoming issue with these updates is that if instance data format draft is updated, then that impacts at least the examples, or not at least, the examples in this draft. So that will mean that whenever the instance data is updated, then there's a need to update this. Now, there's two ways to handle this. Either we continue to update this whenever instance data format is modified, or we kind of strip out the metadata part from the examples, just putting there 3 dots, and then we won't need these updates. And yes, this is how the data model looks like today. Yeah, I hope it's understandable. And so we have the publisher level, and then we have the data store, but the data store capabilities really is just one single key for the data store, and then we have the per node capabilities. The capabilities on the publisher level and the data store and or the per node level are really the same. And I think that's the end. Yes.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. Just a couple of comments. For your NACM node instance identifier, there's now that definition's sort of moved into R6991 BIS. So you could pick it up from there, which has the same definition, I think, as what you require, but then you have dependency on that document. I don't know how long it's going to take. That would be a better choice if we're willing to wait. Then the other comment I mentioned to you offline is that if you go back to your original slide in terms of the selection capabilities, you can select on a wildcard for interface names, but we would have cases where it'd be useful to say, I want to do these statistics for physical interfaces differently from tunnel interfaces or sub-interfaces. And at the moment, you'd have to list every single interface on the device, which would be huge and dynamically changing, or the wildcard is too generic. So I'm not sure what the best solution to that is. I mean, maybe we could augment it in with additional filters, but I'm not sure whether that breaks the logic of somebody reading this if they don't understand those extra filters. But maybe we should discuss that further offline.
Yes, the data type for node selector could be taken from 6991 BIS. It would delay this work. I don't know how 699 progresses. I think we will not be reworking NACM either to use that. So I would like to avoid that, but the main reason is time and dependency. Yeah. I hope, as I understand, the functionality is the same. For more specific filtering, yes, that could be done. A simple wildcard, then we have to define what kind of additional filter we want. And we already have subtree and XPath, so defining a third kind of filter might not be a good idea. Also, I think people are having problems reading XPath filter. So that's, and yeah, XPath is very powerful, and I'm not sure if many people will understand it. So I see a risk there. Also, then we get into the problem of overlapping XPath filters, and how to, then we have priority between them and how to handle them. So my preference would be to maybe put that into a BISOR if that's really needed.
Okay.
This is Qing from Huawei. Actually, for follow up the Robert's point, actually, we have relevant draft to discuss how to specify the selection filter, maybe have to filter some useful data. You don't need to.
Could you speak up, please?
What?
Could you?
We actually have a relevant draft, actually, will be presented by my colleague. Actually, can specify some selection filter. Maybe it's kind of thing relevant to your work, actually. Yeah.
Okay, let's discuss it. Yeah, there is one minor point that I have to discuss with Lada about the Yang Doctor review. I think we can take it offline.
All right, so I'll quickly go over the draft for HTTPS-based transport for subscribe notifications. We are currently tracking 3 issues in the GitHub for the draft. The first one is related to binary encoding. I think there was some discussion here and an interest and desire to see binary encoding supported. So assuming that the publisher does learn of the receiver capabilities, and we'll talk about that in issue number 3, can the media type itself be used for communicating binary data? So as an example, we are currently saying we support XML and JSON, and there's an option to basically add CBOR to that media type list. Any comments, questions? Okay, I see some thumbs up. All right, the second issue that we're tracking is for whether we need to rename receivers to HTTPS receivers. And there was a question, of course, that this should ideally have been defined in 8639, but since each draft is having to define the receivers, the question was, do we need to rename it to be transport specific? The only question is, if it's being declared within the namespace of the model, do we need to really indicate, for example, within HTTPS notif that it is a HTTPS receiver? I would think it would be obvious from the module name. And for if there's any concern about any conflict, of course, then each receiver is being declared in their own namespace. So at least the current thought is no, but unless there are any objections or comments. Okay. Moving on to the last issue for the discovery of receiver capabilities, and this is something Hank just talked about. So from a transport specific, the options are it's either to use options or GET. We, of course, would prefer options to return the capabilities of the receiver. The only point I think that is left to discuss is what the format for advertisement of those capabilities is going to look like. And that's something that, as I suggest, the other draft could look into. So among the list of capabilities that we're currently tracking is, of course, the media type that I just talked about, which, of course, includes CBOR. And then the second capability that we are looking at is bundled messages as defined by the notification messages draft. All right. Any comments or questions? All right. You're good.
Sorry, Balaji Ericsson. I would be interested that if you get these capabilities, obviously, or I assume you don't want to get the capabilities for every single HTTP notification, then probably you need to say something about how long you think that they are still valid or caching them or.
Okay, so if I understand, so first to answer your question, now this is per receiver.
Yes.
So this is, I'm trying to understand what the receiver capabilities are. So, and the second part, are you contemplating that the capabilities might change in transit or in between?
No. On Monday, I have a notification to send. I discover the capabilities. Will I still assume the same capabilities on Tuesday?
Yes.
Indefinitely?
Yes, as
okay. Please
currently
put a statement on that. The second is about security. I got strong comments from some implementers that if you move the receiver definition outside of the subscription part, so it's in direction to its own data model, then configuring NUCM will be quite tricky, because if you have a subscription but someone else is allowed to modify the receiver under your subscription because it's in a separate data tree, that can be a risk. So at least you need to mention this in security consideration.
Okay.
And third, that I'm also working on 3GPP, and 3GPP, it seems, is in a very, very strong need of this, and the urgent need.
Okay. Go ahead and do the.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Question on the capabilities for BALAs, and this is Eric Voigt, by the way. The question was, is this going to be the same capabilities as available next week, last week, or whatever? The goal really would be to have the same kind of capability exposure as we have for the kind of capabilities exchange when Netconf or RESTconf log in and you find the capabilities out for the server. So the idea behind that, at least that I had for this, was that would want to have the same life cycle of capabilities that's done with other types of transport establishments.
In Netconf, the capabilities are connected to the session lifetime, so that's easy. But what do we connect the capabilities lifetime here?
I would have expected that we'd get the same kind of a session establishment going on. That was the assumption. That we do this was part of the capabilities exchange for the session.
Okay. If there are no other questions?
Hey guys, this is Michael from Huawei, and today I want to introduce a module about the bank subscription for event, young event notification. And in some why we propose this draft is because in some use case, the user may want to send multiple event stream or a single message. This event stream may have common characteristics. For example, this event stream may some data object which collect from different source for same time periodic. And there are two related drafts. One is a subscribe notification. It already be published, and that is cannot allow the user to subscribe multiple streams in a single message. Another is a notification bundle, but it does not provide the ability to explicitly specify the relationship of different notification or different streams. And here is some use case. There are two use cases, one for bank subscription, the other for one for bank established subscription. Another is for bank delayed subscription. If we don't have the bank subscription capability, the user need to send here. We can see the user need to send 3 message to establish the subscription to subscribe the module 4, module bar, and module bars. Same time, if we want to delete it, it also need to send 3 message to delete this this subscription. But if we can have a capability allow the user to send only 1 message to subscribe 3 event, and we also can allow the user to use only 1 message to delete this streams. A similar idea is okay. The device can allow to send this only 1 message to the user told okay, these 3 event stream have appeared. Okay. What we does then in this draft, we define a group ID to provide a flag to provide a flag to show the explicit relationship between these different streams, and we'll also define the unit module, which can help user to bank subscribe. It can send multiple. Can send only 1 message for multiple streams, and also allow the publisher to report multiple streams within with a group ID. Here is a module overview, and we define the groups list. Within group, we have a list of streams, and we augmented the subscription and the notification module with a group ID, and also augmented the bank notification message header with some parameters such as message type and group ID. Okay, the key value we show in our module is we provide the group ID. It can help to explicitly specify the relationship between different event stream, and it can help to reduce the round trip of the request and the response. That can help to save the bandwidth on the interface between the client and the server, and maybe can help to provide the multiple source aggregation. Why we present this document here is because we want to get some consensus and want to know whether this is a problem that need to be solved, and want to know how many people are interested in this task that we can move on.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson, just as an interest, what number of subscriptions are you assuming? So are you speaking of 5, 10, 100,000 notifications that you would bundle?
Yes, maybe multiple streams. For example, if we want to collect the device's some state data, and this data is collected on for the same times, and we can bundle this and define this data in a group. So we can only use one group ID in the subscription, established subscription. So we can, okay, the bundle subscription works, and we also can receive this state data in only one message. So we can, we think it can help to reduce the, the interaction between the client and the server. It maybe have some benefit.
I understand that. Just asking, what is your assumption? What size of groups would we be using in the real world? 10,000?
This is Qing from Huawei. It depends on the use cases. For example, if you really want to support this multi-source aggregation, you may get some metric from each member link. Actually, you can aggregate it into the bank link.
Could you speak up, because you're very difficult to
so the number could be very few, actually, less 10. But in some other cases, you can more than 10 or more than 20. Yeah.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. Just a quick question is, if you go back, I think the previous slide maybe, no, one more. In this case, can you also use a subtree filter to achieve the same effect? So rather than actually having to have separate subscriptions for the different paths, food, bar, and Baz, could you use a subtree filter that would achieve the same things? You still end up with one subscription and using the subtree filter to achieve the same thing. So
good question.
So maybe that, I think if I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but I think we should consider, like, you can do this probably with a subtree or an XBAR filter anyway. Do we want another way of expressing the same thing?
This is Hugh again. Actually, I think in some cases for data object you manage it maybe not correlated in each other. So you may make assumptions you need to tag such kind of object. You need to correlate it with each other. So use this subtree filter doesn't work actually. So that's why we introduce a new global ID to help you to correlate different objects, maybe not relevant to each other apparently, but in some use cases, in some contexts, you do need to collect a group of data that have common characteristics, so you can use kind of group ID. So yeah, that's what I.
Okay, then if that's the case, can you give examples in the draft of where like existing solutions don't work? That would be helpful, like where subtree.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Benoit Claes, can you come back one slide? Yeah, this one. So if I understand correctly, this is going to be useful in the after over there, where you're going to delete all the members of the group in one go. Mm-hmm. This is the main advantage, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm wondering if this is a big enough problem to solve, right? Because yes, you have multiple groups of Yang objects that you're streaming. And then, okay, maybe you have to delete them one by one, but actually it's because you don't care any longer. So even if you keep receiving some more while you deleting all the different, what is the right term? Stream, then maybe it doesn't matter. So I'm not sure the gain is huge to tag this as a group and to say, I want to delete everything from group one. Just a question.
I think it's not a need to do everything in one group. It's because you want to subscribe the same characteristic. It's based on your want to do. If it's on your what you want to solve the use case, based on your use case, if you need to subscribe the same data, same characteristic data, you can bundle the streams of this data together within one group. It's no need to one step to subscribe one data and next to do the other data. So this can help to reduce the interaction between the client and the server. So this is some use case. It's not always use it.
Okay, one final question from Eric. Do you want to put it on?
Hi there. I think a lot of the questions were already hit that I had. One other thing that is not explicit in there is you have one filter, as Rob was mentioning, and you could probably get away with this with one filter. But have you thought about having or what the implications of having different filters might be for for each individual stream. I think that that's an interesting question, because knowing how many filters might be interesting and whether the group is actually applicable would be something to work through.
Okay, there is a comment. Oh, sorry. Yeah, before we ask.
It's okay.
No. Okay. So, comment from Martin. The assumption is that it is useful to subscribe with the same filter on many streams. I wonder how common that is.
This is maybe as I introduced before, because this in some telemetry scenarios may want to collect multiple lot of data from the device, and if we have some idea to classify different class into different group, it maybe can help to do some specific application.
Okay. Anyway, so we are over time on this, but I think you should take into consideration the comments that you have received till now. They all seem to be around the use case that you have up there, which doesn't seem to justify the need to bulk manage a set of subscriptions. So maybe you need to work on the use case a little bit and come back with a better way to why this is needed.
Explain the scenarios more clearly. Okay, and show some specific use case.
I think specifically the comment from Martin and Eric on what the use of filters and how you might want to group them.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Ran Tao, I'm from Huawei. My topic is notification capabilities model extension for data no-tag capability support. Actually, the notification capability has already been defined in Netconf notification capabilities, and the notification capabilities model allows the client to discover YARN push-related server capabilities, such as the maximum number of objects can be sent in an update or supported periods of periodic subscription. Without using notification capabilities, it leads to an unexpected failure or additional message exchange for Netconf clients. And when the state of all subscriptions of a particular subscriber to be fetched is huge, fielding queries of operational state on a server can greatly reduce the amount of the data to be streamed out to the destination. And this is the most important effect of the notification capabilities. Actually, in the existing YARN push telemetry mechanism, the YARN push telemetry can provide a mechanism to subscribe and to select the operational state data based on the selection filter. But there is no document to discuss how the selection filter should be. Actually, in the existing mechanism, to pre-configure the selection filter by human intervening is necessary. All you need to rely on the service logic defined by the application. In some situation, for example, in some situation, maybe the clients want to change the selection filter. For that case, the NS service will be terminated and may need to be updated, and the human intervention may need to be involved. Generally, say in the existing mechanism, it is hard for Netconf clients to automatically select which data object is of interest. For example, to identify a set of objects which have common characteristics. To address this issue, in this document, we provide a dynamic way to specify the selection filter. More specifically, we tag characteristics data object and instruct the client or the subscriber to the selected operation. The selected operation, we call it the self-explanation in this draft. With the self-explanation information, we can further filter the queries of operational state on our server, and we can correlate the data objects across the modules which have the common characteristics, and we can reduce the large amount of data to the destination. We argument the notification capabilities module to the node tag capabilities attributes, and with these attributes we can specify which type of the object that can be pushed to the target recipient. Here is our example. For example, if I'm interested in node A and in node C in module 4 and node E in module bar, so what should I do? The first step is we need to tag the node in. The first step is we need to tag the node in each device module to indicate the data that has the common characteristics. For example, here the module 4, it can be like the IETF, can be IETF interface module, and the node A can be like the in discards packets, and the node B can be like the error packets. We tag the node A and the node B to be performance metric. And for the second step, we automatically advise the tag from the live server to the NMS. And in the third step, we subscribe our interested data based on the self-explanation tag, and from the XPath of the data node. And for next step, we would like to hear the comments in this room, and your comments and contributions are welcome. And
Balázs Daniel Eriksson. I see this effort, and I heard about at least one more, but where we want to define different types of node capabilities or data node capabilities of the server, which I think is generally a good idea, but it somehow conflicts with. I was instructed by this group to keep my draft to notification capabilities. Now we are stretching the word notification in this. I don't know the solution. I think the general idea of providing such information is good, but yeah, how to handle it.
Benoit Claes. So I could see some use cases for this. While I was not a big fan of the tags for Yang modules, I see some value for tags for data nodes. And I believe that if we want to do it right, we have to exactly augment Balázs draft for the notification, because that's the right way to do it. But then we have to observe that it goes way beyond telemetry capabilities, right? But I think that this is the right way to do it. Yes.
All right. If there are no other comments, did you have anything?
No.
All right. All right. Just about time, I guess. Oh, no, exactly on the dot. 5:50. Thank you. I think we are done.
That's the agenda, and we're out of time. So thank you. to the second.
Starting off late. But thanks for that reminder. I almost forgotten.
What's it?
How long again?
No jacket in here. Did you notice I went and got hot coffee?
So yeah, I think we now have two slides on so I haven't had time
Annoying chairs asking to do something.
I had been out of time. I thought, I want to try and get those doctors. I thought that I'm still. I hand this back to the question back
And we're working it out.
Yeah, I have
it's a hydro priority.
Well, I need to go find some rewards.
This wasn't quite as bad. There was actually one meeting maybe last week where I wrote this last section while I was chairing. I was just sitting here. No,
I think it was so I think with all the head stuff, I look at all that, it's like I don't know